It is for good reason that Jesus says that we should pray, give us today our daily bread. What you had yesterday will not sustain you tomorrow. It won't sustain you. And if you leave too long and you drift too far, the enemy will take you out. If you take the fresh bread, if you come regularly, get to the fresh bread, he will impart to you. He'll build that sacred enclosure. He'll build those guardrails. But you've got to be committed. I don't know about you guys, but the smell of fresh bread is just so alluring. It kind of pulls you right in. And, you know, I see a day not too far away when out of that cafe, out of there'll come some wonderful baked goods that some of you guys will bake, and these delicacies will draw people far and wide in for a cup of coffee, some great baked goods, and some conversations and some community around Jesus. Intentional conversations. Who knows, when the kitchen comes up, you might have Nana's special recipe sitting in your cupboard. An exclusive breakfast or a lunch or a dinner, I don't know, but all I know is that this is another opportunity for gifts in the body to come to the forefront and bless people. But that smell, you know, we trialed it during the week. We actually baked a loaf during the evening, so there'd be a little bit of a hint in the air. But Wendy baked one in the office. And the girls have me on this new eating regime that has no carbs and no breads and no grains. So then they proceeded to pull it out of the oven, stick it down on the table right beside me, crack that sucker open, slither it with butter and Vegemite. I can see Jess down there smiling because she was one of the offenders. And then they proceeded to just eat the whole loaf in front of me. It was wonderful. There's something about fresh bread, I don't know, it's alluring. It kind of satisfies, but at the same time, it creates some extra hunger and desire to have more because they didn't stop at one slice. They didn't stop until that sucker was nearly gone. They left a little bit on the ends. But that's what it's about. So I don't know if we managed to get some of your text responses, but we asked the question about, you have got some? Okay. You know, Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. And, you know, what do you think that means? So what have we got there, guys? That he will sustain us. He will satisfy us. Jesus is what we need for life evermore. Jesus is essential. Jesus is the rice of life for Asian. That's clever. I love that. So you guys are all around this. That's exactly what it means. Jesus wants to let us know he is the bread of life. He is the one that sustains us. But the more you start to partake of this bread of life in him, the more the hunger is satisfied, but the more the desire goes up for more. You want to experience more. And that's the truth that's coming from him. When you experience real truth that is coming from him, it creates a desire to know more. But here's the deal. There's a price to pay. You got to discipline yourself. You got to get up early if you want to engage and get the fresh bread. At Molokai, they get up at midnight and start waiting for hours. So Jesus is the bread of life. He is the one that sustains us. He is where it comes from. He satisfies everything within you and yet creates a hunger and a desire for more of him so that you experience more of life, because that's where the life comes from. So we're going to talk a little bit about fresh bread today. I'm going to look at some of the Old Testament or the Old Covenant, which is the Hebrew part of the Bible, from the end of Genesis through to Malachi, and then some of the Christian part, which is our part, the Gentiles, from Matthew through to Revelation. But there's stuff to learn in every area. So the first time we see the emphasis on bread is in Exodus chapter, I think it's about chapter 16, and again in Numbers 11. And it talks about manna coming down from heaven. What's happened? The backstory is the people of Israel have been released from 400 years of slavery. And they've come through this magnificent miracle of the Red Sea, which represents baptism. And then they go in, and then they're in this wilderness walking for like 40 years. And it says God fed them. He fed them daily. He made this thing come down from heaven called manna. Sometimes they refer to it as the bread of angels. It was like a coriander seed with some kind of nutty flavor. I don't know how they know that, but that's what it was. And he would sustain them, and everything they needed was in that. But there was a deal with it. You had to go out every day and get just enough for today. And he tested them. He said, whatever you do, don't try and store it up until tomorrow. It's not going to happen. Of course, human beings being what they are, some of them decided to store it up, and then we got up the next morning and it was all full of maggots. It says it just went rotten. It was awful. So they had to go out daily. The only other part of it that was a requisition for them was to say when the Sabbath is on, because they were modeling off the Genesis, they would rest one day so on the day before they could actually gather for enough for 2 days. So the principle in here is that God's helping them understand you have to have revelation every day. You have to get provision every day. You can't store it up for tomorrow. You have to sit at Jesus' feet today and get the fresh revelation, the fresh bread. You know what? Even Woolworths understands this. What do they say? We're the fresh food people. Why? Because fresh is best. Naturally. Or organically. Or whatever Lee you want. Because there's plenty of Lees in there now. There's nothing worse than stale bread. I don't know if you've ever gone to get some bread and you put it and it's all covered in mold and you think, did anybody else notice this? It's not good. It's not good. There's nothing worse. There's nothing more offensive than the stale bread. And God knows that it doesn't nourish us. That's why go back to Israel. What did they have to do? Daily they had to get it, and there was only enough for today. Fresh bread. Now here's the deal about fresh. Fresh has a time limit on it. It's got a time limit. You have to position yourself and know when that moment is there to sit at Jesus' feet and receive from the bread of life. It's got a time limit. So it's like the sunrise and the sunset. If you want to see it, it's got a time limit. You've got to get up at a certain time and you've got to be there. So last night, I finished here about 4 o'clock. We went down, we walked down to Burleigh Headland, and then we went through in the back to Tally. And then we're coming back. I've never been there at night. Have you ever been there at night? There's these like fireflies in there everywhere. It was like being an avatar. It was completely beautiful. And they came around the bend and I just grabbed my phone and I took that shot right on sunset. I wouldn't have got that if I wasn't there. See, fresh has a time limit to it. Has a time limit. The disciples knew that. They knew there was something about Jesus' interaction with his Father because at one stage they said, could you teach us how to pray? Could you teach us how to get what you're getting? Could you teach us how to gain and maintain our relationship? And of course, he taught them that prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Then what happens then? He says, give us our... So you see, there's a principle that happened in the old covenant that actually is coming through. That's coming through the cross. So this one's good to apply. This one's right through. Okay, give us our daily bread. Daily bread is the fresh bread. It's what makes us alive. It's what makes us fresh. It gives us wisdom, gives us revelation. So why do you need that fresh bread? Some practical things about why you need it. Number one is it counteracts drifting. We all have an opportunity in our life to drift every day. And some of us drift further than others. So you have to watch from drifting. It's the foot traffic of life that causes us to drift. And we lose our focus and we lose our position. And our compass gets off true north and gets a bit wacko. So what it does is it pulls us back to true north. I think I said to you last week on the Monday night, we actually had to do devotions together here, a few of us. And the theme that came out all the way through that, because we're in Hebrews chapter 2, was pay careful attention to not drift away. So it was right there, even this last Monday night. Now, when I was a kid, those of you that know me know that I'm not a fisherman. Not at all. I have no patience. Those fish are just annoying and they're rebellious. They will not do as they're told. But when I was a kid, Dad took me out on a fishing trip out from Chute Harbour, and we went out through this harbour, and it was rough as, and I wasn't really enjoying it as it was anyway. And then we get out there, and then they're all excited because they're throwing their lines over, and they're picking up this red emperor, and there's this fish, and there's all this going on. But what had happened is the captain had kind of anchored about 20 meters from this great big rock. And so we're all there, and we're all looking out to sea, and we're all doing this. Next minute, it's like everyone's panicking. I go, what's going on? And the captain's running around. I look around, and the rock is like about 8 meters away. While we've been busy fishing and having fun, anchor's not holding, and we have drifted. And suddenly it was action, all stations to get out of there. So that's what happens. That's what your soak devotions will do. Will get you back when you start to drift, because drifting is just how it happens. So you got to stay near the bakery door of Malachi. You got to wait for the revelation. You got to sit at Jesus' feet, whichever one kind of resonates with you. So the fresh bread counteracts drifting, and it also imparts wisdom. When you sit at Jesus' feet, you're shadowing Christ. You're allowing the Spirit of God to give you fresh bread, to give you fresh wisdom, to impart to you the wisdom of the ages. That's why Martha was told when Mary sat at the feet of Jesus, and Martha was getting all angry and busy and said, why doesn't she come out here and help me? Jesus said, she's chosen the best thing. In fact, there's only one thing really matters, and she's chosen it. So we've got to take real care with it. So you've got to wait daily for this fresh bread. It's the bread of life. Jesus is the bread of life. Now, there's a bit of a warning here when you do your soap devotions, that you can get caught up in 3 different kind of areas. I'm hoping you'll end up in the last. If you just make it all about an academic exercise of information, just information, you will live out of your head. Then what will happen is you will become a Pharisee, a religious person. You will philosophize about everything. You will debate about everything, but your life will be so inconsistent that what you say and how you live totally misrepresents Christ. You become a hypocrite to people. And I'm sure you've heard that all before. I'm not going out with those Christians because they're hypocrites. They say this and they do that. They're not feeding on the fresh bread. They're not living on today's revelation. Or you can get really impassioned and lead from your heart. And then what happens then is that when you're impassioned from the heart and you get the inspiration, you can get so excited. You can get so passionate. You can get so out there, but you can lack wisdom. And then the thing that you are so passionate about can actually end up hurting people because you're in error. So you can get lost in both of those. But what I'm hoping is you go from the information of the head as you do your soap, down into the inspiration of your heart, and then it's got to go into incarnation. That's where you consume it, you eat it, you take it in, you apply it, you walk it out, and then it becomes who you are. That's where you want to head. That's when it makes all the difference. When what you read of Jesus' teaching becomes who you are, you become so irresistible to people, If you live out of your head, you become resistible. If you live out incarnate, you become irresistible. They just know there's something about you that's different. You handle things differently. Why do you not lose your cool at work? Why do you have such calm with everything that's going on? It's because it's become incarnate. So it counteracts drifting, imparts wisdom, and the final thing it does, it creates guardrails. It puts guardrails into your life, which is so, so important. That's that sacred enclosure. I don't know if you've drive down the road and you can drift it off a little bit, and then what happens? You go on the rumble strips. Remember those? Oh, you're back in here. It's there designed to wake you up. It's like a guardrail without having a guardrail. Now, I went and tried test driving a new car recently. They got some weird stuff on these cars now. You don't actually get to drive it all by yourself. If you go over the white line, it jerks the wheel out of your hand and puts it back in there. What is that? If I want to go over the white line, I want to get a little bit over. No. You don't understand, but they're recognizing that a lot of accidents are happening because people are drifting. They're drifting off and they're going across the line. It's getting dangerous. So the guardrails are there. These things, the word, the wisdom of the ages creates guardrails to take care of the momentary drifts. And the reality is we all drift. I said to you last week that I did a journal out of Philemon, I think it was. And it was about don't write anybody off. Even if they've done bad stuff, you've got to love them, because Paul met Onesimus in a prison. And he said, don't write people off. And then 2 hours later, I'm sitting with Ruth talking about someone that did something particularly bad, and I'm writing them off right there 2 hours later. But why was I able to catch it and come back? Because the Lord just said, should we just talk about what we talked about 2 hours ago? Go back there. Oh, right, okay. Got it. 2 days later, I did the same thing. Same thing. And then, fortunately, Ruth just said, hey, why don't you go back and read the devotion? So then the Lord used her. But this is how it is. We can't stop drift. You just won't be able to stop it. But your daily devotions, that daily fresh bread from the bread of heaven, the bread of life from Jesus, is what keeps you coming back to the right place. Now, Pastor Rain, I'm going to read to you a bit out of the book today. Pastor Rain talks about an account that he had with this area of temptation. I think you'll like it. He says, none of us are immune to the momentary drifts from bad decision making. Several years ago, I was feeling tired and weary, and temptation availed itself of the perfect alibi. I'd completed engagement speaking early, and I spent one free night in a hotel near the airport. I was unaware that particular area was known for prostitution. I asked the maitre d' for a table for one. I was no sooner seated than a strikingly beautiful woman came and sat down across from me. Are you satisfied with the hotel, she asked. I assumed she was the hotel surveying me to see if I was happy with the hotel. I said, oh, why? Absolutely, it's a beautiful hotel. And the rooms, are they to your satisfaction? Oh, yes, I said naively, the beds are so comfy. She goes, I'm here to offer you elite services, the kind reserved only for the gentleman. He said, I must be pretty dim because I still didn't catch on. Services, I asked. Yes, escort services that will make your stay a memorable one. It finally clicked. My light went from dim to bright. She was working all right, but not as a surveyor. Immediately, an inner voice interrupted me and said this, well, no one to know. You're in a strange hotel, in a strange part of the country, and let's face it, you deserve a break. Now, it may have been an illusion, but I thought for a moment I saw out of the corner of my eye Joseph running from Potiphar's wife. And when he passed me, he yelled, you better follow me, Cadero, and you better follow now. I said, excuse me. And I forgot something in my room, and I went out and I ran up to catch up with Joseph, got to my room, bolted the door, and I'm so glad I did till this day. He goes, from men and women, how did I learn this? From men and women I had watched before. I knew that Joseph had to flee from Potiphar. He knew lust's pull, as did Samson. Abigail had to deal with David's anger and her own frustration. She dealt wisely. She'll teach you how to not make costly mistakes. Elijah's depression found him in desperation. Jeremiah knew it too, and they took the time to teach me. Peter left his calling and went back fishing. He knew what it felt like to want to give up. There's so much. He said, where did I get these guardrails? He says, you incorporate them in your soul as you partake of the fresh bread. Amazing. See, you can't get away from temptation. You can't get away from the opportunity to drift. You must keep coming back daily. Daily, you need to keep refocusing daily. That's what's got to happen. So you build the guardrails, get the sacred enclosure. Otherwise, you will find yourself drifting too close. And how many times have you had someone in your life that you think they're going well, they're going well, they're going well, because all this is happening under the surface, and the next minute it's like, boom, and there's this massive explosion. It's a big cost. There is a big cost to actually getting the fresh bread. Massive cost. Let me read to you another bit out of here about a revival that you guys will probably all know about. This is why it's important daily. Have you ever visited a town or a church that had a great revival once took place? And now it's little more than a musty old museum. The life has gone, the excitement has vanished. The crowds have dwindled to a trickle. The whole place smells of old boards and mildew carpets. A friend of mine told me about a visit to a village in Wales in 1904, where the Welsh revival had swept across the countryside like a prairie fire. It made him sad to see one of the stone churches erected in that era now being used as a barn, a doorless, windowless husk for storing hay. The door had once dispensed fresh bread. The door of the church had once dispensed fresh bread. Now it was full of straw. It is for good reason that Jesus says that we should pray, give us today our daily bread. What you had yesterday will not sustain you tomorrow. It won't sustain you. And if you leave too long and you drift too far, the enemy will take you out. If you take the fresh bread, if you come regularly, get to the fresh bread, he will impart to you. He'll build that sacred enclosure. He'll build those guardrails. But you've got to be committed. Jeremiah, one of the prophets to Israel, was always trying to get them to turn back, and they were always half-hearted about their relationship with God. But he said, you'll seek me and you'll find me if you seek me with all of your heart. With all of your heart. Now, a lawyer came to Jesus and asked him the same question. He said, what's important about life? What's the number one law? And he's trying to trip him up. What's the number one thing that I've got to do? And so Jesus did something very, very unique. He gave him the law that he understood, and he tacked on something to it that was in another part in Leviticus, but the law was that in Deuteronomy 6. And here's what he said. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Doesn't that sound a little bit like seeking God with all your heart? And if you seek him with all of your heart, you'll find him. See, that principle is coming through the cross. It's actually coming through. So we can apply that. Seek him, and then love your neighbor as yourself. It is fresh bread and the connection with fresh bread that helps us to go all in. It gets us all in. All in for God, all in for his family, the church, and then all in for the world around us. That's why the junction exists. It's for the world around us. And it's starting to have some very significant things taking place. We need to all be about having fresh bread so that we're fresh and we're alive and we're not stale. So people can come and feed from us. That's what it means to be for the Gold Coast. I'll never forget one day having a meeting with Pastor Wayne. He was really upset because one of his friends, who was a long time in ministry, it had just come out that he'd been for several years having an affair with his secretary. And he said it disturbed him so much. It really disturbed him so much. He said, eventually I had to go and ask him, how? He said he went to him and the guy said, please don't judge me. He said, I'm not trying to judge you. He said, I want to understand how you can stand up on Sunday and preach the most eloquent of sermons and lead people in all sorts of ways and deal with business people and yet be so incongruent and be having this affair going on. And the guy said to him, this is what I was doing. This is about the head, the heart, and the incarnation. I knew Sunday was coming, so I'd open the Bible and I'd find something here and give it to the people. Then I'd go to another meeting and I'd find something here and give it to the people. And I'd go to another meeting and I'd find something here and I'd give it to the people. You see, whereas I should have been doing this, packing it into here, then giving it to the people. That's what makes us consistent. That's what makes us attractive. He said, I was just getting food for other people and not allowing and tapping into the bread of life for myself. He drifted. And the further you drift, the harder it is to get back to where you were. So you got to pay the price. We've got to pay the price for the fresh bread. You've got to get up early, stay up late, do whatever works for you, but figure out how's the time for you to sit at Jesus' feet. Because this is the mystery of the gospel. People don't get it. The mystery of the gospel is Christ in you. It's the bread of life in you, working in and through you to love on you, and then you love on your family, and you love on the people around you. And if you're not sure what the gospel is, over there is a light on a whiteboard. I drew the gospel back up again. The gospel presentation. Say, could you explain that to me? How we get out of brokenness and get connected with Jesus? And go and do that. But I'm just so excited about this because if the whole church got this, Seriously, if the whole church of the West got this principle of tapping into fresh bread from heaven, sitting there, being conformed to the image of Christ, not just taking it into your head, and becoming all religious, and not just putting it in your heart and becoming a fanatic where you turn people away, but incarnate, you become a living epistle where the word is living in you and through you, and then people see and become attracted to that. That's why the whole message about being for the Gold Coast is. And that's why I actually had 2 other series planned after For the Gold Coast, and God switched them both on me and said, this is the one you're doing right now. Because in order to be effective, if you're going to sit with tax collectors and sinners, you have to be tapped into the fresh bread. Because, like it or not, people in our world today can smell a dud a mile off. They can smell if you're authentic, and they can smell if you are not. If you're a moldy old piece of bread, I don't know what that was. You had some experience somewhere, but it's certainly not relevant for now. So part 2 of this is to be for the Gold Coast. We've got to sit at Jesus' feet. There's no time here on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to think, well, someone asked me a question or one of the girls a question. Could you excuse me? I just need to go and pray about that. No, I said, girls, we've got to be praying without ceasing. We have got to be game on all the time now, because people are asking questions and they want to know, they're asking things, they want answers, and they're trying to discover and they're trying to work it out. So you've got to learn. This is what this soap does. It keeps you tapped into the vine. It keeps you connected to Jesus, keeps you fresh. And so you've also got the wisdom of the ages so that you can answer. Because when someone asks you something, and if you try and fudge it, don't ever fudge it. If you don't know, just say, you know what, I don't know. But I know someone that does, I go talk to them. Because if you try and fudge it, there's a look in your eye when you try and fudge, which people can see, that goes, you don't really believe this, or you really haven't even taken the time to figure this out yourself. So it becomes a bad witness. So we got to be game on. So I think that's why the Lord has said this is about sitting at his feet. It's about sitting at his feet. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish with communion together. We're going to participate. So you guys on Church Online, grab yourself a bit of bread, bit of juice. So the guys are going to just serve you. And while they're doing that, I want to read another portion of Scripture, because this particular topic, I think Pastor Wayne has got a lot of revelation from God on this. And I'm going to read it to you. So they're going to pass it out, and then we're going to have communion together, because Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. And around the communion, he said, this bread is my body, which is given for you. Every time you partake, do this in remembrance of me, saying, hey, listen, I'm reminding you, I'm where your life comes. I'm where your provision comes from. I'm where your sustenance comes from. But Pastor Wayne draws back to a guy called Amos in the Old Covenant, who was speaking to Israel, and he prophesied something that would happen. So it already took place, but Pastor Wayne thinks, like, in his observation, we're actually seeing it duplicated or mirrored again now. So this is what he says, called it starving in the land of plenty. There's a famine in the church today. It's not always so easy to spot, because we tend to see it with wrong eyes. One of our more neglected mentors, the prophet Amos, told us long ago about a coming famine. He said, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine for bread or a thirst for water, but rather for hearing the words of the Lord. He said, today's church suffers from the famine of fresh bread, the bread of life. It's not from a dearth of resources. A recent Barna report says, listen to this, Americans spent $59 billion a year on Christian products and programs. No shortage there. We have a plethora of events and books and seminars and DVDs, and each is promising the magic elixir, everything from personal growth to financial freedom to absolute fulfillment and global revival. We have prepackaged antidotes to small group woes, motivational messages to stir your soul, and conferences that guarantee congregational growth. Books advertise prayers that will negate all your future ills. Music guarantees to send your spirit soaring. Plug and play ministries are packaged in box sets to increase the church attendance. And scripture wristbands provide conscience-soothing assurance of whose army we're in, without mandating the time or expense or appropriate spiritual training. Despite all this, few would deny the spiritual famine raging across the land. If we're going to fulfill the Lord's calling for our lives, we will need to do better, be better nourished and in sharper condition. Placebos, sugar-coated spiritual boosters may give us the taste of sweetness, but they will never strengthen us adequately to vanquish our woes. They will never grow us to be pillars and support of truth that were required in these last days. They will never deliver the necessary character for young leaders to be called to take us into the future. We must tap into the same source that nourished the saints of old, like Isaac, who dug the wells of his father Abraham. So too, we must dig again the wells of our fathers so we might journey through the deserts to see the promises fulfilled. Do you long, this is my question while you're holding your communion now, do you long to see the Spirit of the Lord working within you? Do you desire to reflect his heart more than your own? If so, I have just one piece of advice for you. Eat fresh bread. Wait every day at heaven's door. Get bread while it's warm and fragrant and fresh from the oven, no matter how early you have to get up or how late you have to stay up. Search out fresh bread. It will be well worth your time and your effort. As we're holding the elements, Jesus, the night he was betrayed, he took the bread and he took the juice. And he said, guys, this is my body given for you. They didn't really know what that was about at that time, but we do. It's his body given because he is the bread of heaven. And he says, and whenever you eat, remember me. I'm your source of strength. I'm your source of provision. I'm your source of life. So take a moment, close your eyes, and then just eat. And thank Jesus for your provision. A little bit later in the evening, he said to the disciples around some wine, he said to them, this is my blood of the new covenant. Once again, they didn't have a clue what he was talking about, but they knew it was significant. Something was going on that was significant. And he said, this blood is the blood that cleanses you. It cleanses you from all sin. This is the blood that was given for you, for your life. So as we eat, now as we drink, take a moment. Is there any area that the Lord's speaking to you about that maybe you need to let go of? The Bible calls that repentance. Just says, you know what, Lord, I'm not right here. Would you help me here? Take a moment to do that, and then let's drink together. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Father, right now, please help us to remember it's not a yearly bread. It's not a monthly bread. It's not a weekly bread. The only bread that sustains is the daily bread. And we have to daily come to you to receive the wisdom from the ages, the divine mentors in Scripture that will help us create sacred enclosures, that will help us build guardrails, that will impart wisdom. Stop us from drifting. Lord, help us to realize it's you and you alone as the bread of heaven that satisfies the hunger in our souls, but at the same time creates a desire for us to long for more of you, that we be conformed to the image of Christ. So, Father, as we just spend a moment now, we're going to sing again that song, Lord, I give you my heart. Lord, would you just do whatever you need to do in our heart to prepare us to sit at your feet around the soap devotions and get daily our bread from heaven to sustain us. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.